The NAACP is an organization that works around resolutions. So much of what we do involves drafting resolutions related to all of these various issues on our Black agenda, and then taking those resolutions to a national level, if possible, starting locally, going to state, and then national level. I'm the chair of the Region 7 Resolutions Committee, so I'm going to be going out to all of the Region 7 chapters, which is DC, Virginia, and Maryland, to be able to obtain resolutions from them, educate them on what resolutions, how they should look, the whereas and therefores, and then be able to present that, get voted on, and then present them at the national level to all of the branches of the NAACP. It was an experience for me last year. It was my first time going to our national convention. It was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we had the opportunity to participate in the resolutions. And it is a lively debate of what you might call the most dedicated activists. These are people who before we talked about ranked choice voting in Annapolis, we had a debate over ranked choice voting in the resolutions, during the resolutions debate at the national level. Oakland was very concerned about the fact that a lot of elderly people may not be able to properly understand how to do the ranked choice. And so you might vote for one person, and that one vote may be that person does not win because they aren't ranked high enough amongst the other choices that are on the ballot. And that was a concern that people held. And so it was a very close vote at the national level on ranked choice voting. And so in addition, the NAACP was one of the first organizations, national organizations, to call for the impeachment of Donald Trump during the first term. So it's not something that the NAACP is beyond, and it's something that we were able to take back to our members here as well. Again, I'm the president. Our political action chair, Kiana Banks, is in the back with the blonde hair. She helped coordinate this event as well, and has been a wonderful collaboration partner as well, making sure that everything is handled very well. She came here several times to be able to coordinate with the Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church, which is led by Pastor Stephen Tillett. Reverend Tillett is a previous president of the Anne Arundel County NAACP as well. And I came in under his leadership into this organization. I was living in Prince George's County, moved here to Anne Arundel County, and he was my leader. He still is my leader. And so I take much direction from him. And a couple of weeks ago when we were here, I saw the newspaper article on an apology that Asbury Broadneck had received. And we were in the midst at the time of massive discussions in the county around an apology for slavery that the county executive had decided to issue. So this is something that's an ongoing debate in our community, and I think that we are poised with this legislative symposium to be able to help push issues forward and make sure that you all and our membership, non-members, are educated on what these key issues are. You all have some experts in front of you who will be the ones that are speaking to these issues. Like I said, we're waiting on our first moderator, Martin Mitchell. So if you all be patient, real quick, he should be here shortly, and then we'll read the bios and get everyone introduced and make sure that everything goes smoothly, okay? How's that sound? And we're all doing this. I wanted to say one thing. We have two members that passed recently, and so we're doing a lot of this in their memory. One of our major members for me was Patrick Flaherty. Patrick came to every political action committee meeting that I held. Patrick was very engaged in the community. Patrick would provide his knowledgeable and his opinions, and he provided his person. He was with me and Ralph, who was at the front table, at every voter registration event. Every voter registration event, Ralph was there. Patrick was there. So it was very hard for me to process the fact that he had passed, because I had just seen him 2 weeks earlier at the Kunta Kinte Festival. So I went to his memorial service last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was very emotional. And we were able to provide a resolution from the NAACP thanking his family and issuing our condolences to them. And then we also have Ms. Christine Davenport, who was a major institution in our community, not just in the NAACP. Ms. Davenport helped found many of the Black organizations and Black women-led organizations in Anne Arundel County that still exist today. She was a major member of the NAACP. She was our membership committee chair. She also helped to guide our scholarship committee that passed out scholarships to the young people. So she was always there with a good word of encouragement. She never wanted to see dissension within the NAACP. She wanted to make sure that all of us were working toward common goals within the mission of the NAACP, advancing African American opportunity in economics and beyond. She was a teacher, educator in Anne Arundel County schools, and a lot of the work that she did around educating Black people is reflected in the work that we do here in the NAACP as well. Our education committee chair, Mary Dodoni, is downstairs. We just finished a school redistricting debate that the NAACP was able to play a major role in, and it's off of the legacy of Miss Christine Davenport and Patrick Flaherty that we're able to continue to do the work that we do. And we definitely will keep them close to our hearts and in our memory today as we keep moving forward. And as I said, we're going to get started in a second, okay? Thank you. Yes, if you all come up here, that'd be perfect. I want to make sure everything's streaming in the back. Okay, so I did want to also mention a few things. One, we need to make sure that no food comes in the sanctuary. Food is only to be downstairs, and I hope you all were able to get some donuts. Was everybody, raise your hand if you got some donuts. Oh, thank you. Somebody, donuts. Come on now. Yes. Exactly. So we're here for you. Also, in terms of our discussion today, across the board, I wanted to set some ground rules for all of us. That we're criticizing ideas and not people. Want to make sure that we focus on the substance of arguments and avoiding personal attacks or blame. It's going to be hard for me to do sometimes, but please check me. Listen actively to make sure that you all pay attention to understand and not just reply. I know that's also something that I find difficult, especially in this moment. Ask clarifying questions like, did I get that right? I know our panelists will be prime examples of everything that I'm saying. Share our airtime, okay? Be mindful of dominating or holding back, and make sure that you encourage the quieter voices, okay? So we're not trying to dominate the entire discussion. And if you find you feel like you're speaking up too much, don't be ashamed to step back, especially when we're doing our workshops. Assume good intentions. Approach conversations with a belief that others mean well, and speak for yourself. Use I statements and avoid generalizing about groups, which in this, be generous in that, in this discussion. And respect confidentiality. So what's shared in the room stays in the room or within defined boundaries. And be honest and be kind. Express views candidly while avoiding meanness or inflammatory language. We want to make sure that we do have a safe space that people can be vulnerable in, and help keep our discussions focused and building trust. All right, so I'm gonna get started. We are streaming. Also, go to our website as well. You all can log into the Anne Arundel County NAACP website and get our bios and see the agenda there as well. And I'm going to begin by reading our bios so that we don't lose much time. Let me get that for you all. Okay. He just got off the exit, guys. All right, so I know up first we have Linda Hanifan Bonner. Linda, raise your hand, please. Okay, Linda is an amazing organizer and activist, policy strategist, and let me get to, all right. I've met Linda first through ACT with the Arundel Connecting Together Attainable Housing team. And for the past 5 years, Dr. Linda Hanifan Bonner has co-chaired the ACT Attainable Housing team. This is Anne Arundel Connecting Together, supporting the passage of moderate price dwelling legislation, moderate price dwelling unit legislation, workforce housing, redevelopment of older buildings and abandoned properties, and addressing racial disparities and zoning inequities in housing and land use planning. The team's current focus includes legislation for cottage communities and leveraging faith-based land for affordable housing. Dr. Bonner also serves as legislative director for Maryland State Senator Shanika Henson, District 30, Anne Arundel County. In this role, Dr. Bonner oversees legislative requests, conducts research, manages the legislative review and hearing process, and coordinates advocacy efforts. Dr. Bonner is recognized for advancing social justice, equity, and affordable housing initiatives in Anne Arundel County. Previously, Dr. Bonner worked as an environmental and land use planner in Montgomery County, contributing to the county's first moderate price dwelling unit legislation. Through her firm, Hanifan Management Services, she provided outreach for infrastructure projects. Her nonprofit leadership includes executive roles with the Water Design Build Council, the National On-Site Wastewater Association, and the Raymond Wood Foundation, with expertise in financial sustainability, board, governance, and fundraising. Her volunteer service includes board and treasurer roles with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and the Raymond A. Wood Foundation. Dr. Bonner is an ordained elder and trustee at First Presbyterian Church of Annapolis and is active with the Committee on Anti-Racism and Equity, Anne Arundel Women Getting Together, and the Parole Rotary Club. Dr. Bonner resides in Heritage Harbor with her husband, Butch Hammersmith. She enjoys cycling, fitness, yoga, gardening, restoration projects, and cooking. She holds degrees from Johns Hopkins University in Environmental Science, Human Development, and Organization Management. Clap it up for Dr. Bonner, please. Thank you. Emily Hovermale is next. Please raise your hand, Emily. Thank you. All right, Emily Hovermale brings over 15 years of experience in community organizing and government relations to her role as the External Affairs Director at the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, dedicated to helping families move from areas of concentrated poverty to high-quality housing in areas with strong schools, low crime, and ample job opportunities. Throughout her career, she's been a driving force in advocacy and coalition building, championing the needs of vulnerable populations and activating community members to engage with policymakers. Emily holds a Master of Social Work degree and a concentration in social action and community development from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Clap it up for Ms. Hovermale. Thank you. All right, Albert Turner from the Public Justice Center. Raise your hand, please, sir. Thank you. All right, Albert Turner is an attorney in the Human Right to Housing Project at the Public Justice Center. Prior to joining PAC, Albert was an attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project Incorporated, HPRP, where he worked in the Veterans Legal Assistance Project, that reducing barriers to housing and employment imposed by Criminal Records Project, and the Housing Justice Project. At HPRP, Albert represented clients in veteran benefit and discharge upgrade claims, helping clients expunge past criminal records, and defended clients in court, eviction proceedings, and in administrative hearings with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. He earned a JD from Howard University and a BA from Oakwood University. Albert is a board member for Restorative Response Baltimore, a conflict resolution and community building organization that provides ways for people to collectively and effectively prevent and resolve conflicts and crime. He also serves on the Section Council for the Delivery of Legal Service section of the Maryland State Bar Association. Clap it up, please, for Mr. Albert Turner. Thank you. All right, in light of Mr. Mitchell's not being here yet, let's get this started, Mr. Turner. So in terms of the state of tenant affairs in the state of Maryland, how would you describe what you're seeing in terms of tenants' rights, tenants being able to afford housing affordability for tenants, and apartment affordability? Here in Anne Arundel County, we don't have any 2 bedrooms under $1,600 a month. So is that a common experience across what your market that you work in?
Yeah, and thank you for that introduction. I did want to add that I also organize and work with Renters United Maryland, and I'm here on behalf of them. They are a statewide national organization that advocates for tenant rights in Annapolis mainly, but they all also intersection of housing affordability, intersection with criminal justice, intersection with environment. And we all know that all of these things intersect in the way that allow for renters to be able to afford their homes, be able to stay in their homes for long term, be able to have enough money to become homeowners in the future, and enough to be able to access education and the likes. And so this is always something that we advocate for. And as far as housing affordability goes, so in my personal capacity, I represent tenants in Baltimore City who are looking at eviction. So generally speaking, tenants who are looking at failure to pay rent cases, if their landlord is saying that they breached a lease, if they're trying to not renew the lease, we come in and we defend them in those cases if there are defenses to be had. We also do some type of source of income discrimination cases. And so when you have a person who has a voucher is a subsidized way for an individual to live in a home. So the government is paying a certain percentage of their rent based on their income. Most voucher holders are low income or have disabilities that don't allow them to work, or they're elderly or they're veterans. And so these vouchers allow them to live in units where the government pays a certain percentage of that. What we see often is discrimination based on that voucher. Even still, so in 2020, state of Maryland passed what's called the HOME Act, which requires that landlords can't discriminate against someone because of their voucher status or because of their source of their income. A lot of times we would see landlords who would say, no Section 8, right? No Section 8. The reason for that comes from a long list of racism, to be perfectly honest, right? This idea that Section 8 voucher holders are overwhelmingly Black, they're poor, we don't want those folk in our neighborhood, I don't want them renting out to them. And so that created a whole different issue when it came to housing justice, because when a person has a voucher, they can't find a landlord that will rent to them, they could lose that voucher and thus be rendered homeless. And so those are the type of issues that we deal with. So back to your original point, Stephen, I would say obviously housing affordability is the biggest issue that we see. And that is in line with the wages that have been stagnant, right? So more and more people are spending a bigger share of their rent, a bigger share of their check on rent, right? And so generally speaking, the idea is that 30% of a person's monthly income should be going to rent. What we're seeing is that it's becoming 50%, 60%, right? It's not allowing the person to save, not allowing the person to adequately, pay for emergency services or pay for their children to do things. And so what we're seeing is that, particularly with our Black renters in Maryland, a large percentage of folk looking at eviction. So the most staggering stat that I've seen is that in Maryland, if you are a Black renter and you are a child, you have a 20% chance of being evicted. 20%, that's 1 in 5. That is the status of the Black family, the Black renting family in the state, particularly when it comes to Black women, because we know that Black women are the ones who take care of the children and who the children live with. And so we're looking at a real issue when it comes to that type of issue, because the price of rent is just way too high and wages are too stagnant. And particularly in the state of Maryland, where I think it was like 10% of our employment is tied to federal jobs, where federal jobs are being cut, federal jobs, there's a big furlough, right, that happens, so people are way behind on rent. That is a big thing that we're seeing as far as housing affordability right now, and I'll get into more of that kind of stuff, but that's just the big issue that we are seeing in Maryland. We just got started.
Well, I should say hello. My name is Councilman Martin Mitchell. I'm from Prince George's County, but I come to Arundel County. It's like my second home. I lived in Odenton for a period of time. I think I mentioned that to you. But I'm a housing champion, longtime housing advocate, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of these individuals in Annapolis to fight for housing policy. And so that's just a little bit about me. One of the things that I love to speak about is I helped pass rent stabilization in Prince George's County. We didn't get everything we wanted, right? We still need a lot more tenant protections, but it was a very big step for the county. State of the market. Oh man. Oof. Yes. So just go ahead. Okay. So we have some very great panelists here. I wanted to go towards my first question, and I was going to switch the order up a little bit. And I'll pose this question to all of you: who are the major private players in maintaining housing unaffordability? And that's kind of the truth about it, So, who do you guys feel are the other major players? You guys want to get started now? Yeah, no, that's what I said. Switch the order up a little bit.
Okay. Who are the major players in Anne Arundel County? I think there's a cast of characters that are major players that begin with the administration, in that regard with the Office of Planning and Zoning, and how effective they are in their approval process, and I would have to say that tongue-in-cheek, because it's one of the greatest impediments to affordable housing here in the county is getting permits through the process. The second, probably most important player is Arundel Community Development Services, whose role is navigating through the building industry to see that the right projects are in place, negotiating and getting the funding from the federal and state governments to ensure that we can have financial support for the affordable developers to get the projects in place. And then we have the county council. And the county council over the past 5 years has been extraordinarily effective in passing policies that would enable us to have affordable housing. They include workforce housing, the fair housing law, moderate means housing, pilots, which are payment in lieu of taxes, accessory dwelling units. We've established the Housing Trust Fund, which enables money to go into both rental and ownership. We've got elderly and workforce housing. We've got an expanded multi-purpose project in Fort Meade in the BWI growth area. And most of all, we have the Housing Attainability Act, which is incredible important. And one of the leaders of our housing policy has been Councilwoman Allison Pickard, who I see sitting here today, and to thank her. And we also have Councilman Smith, who's bringing on a new piece of legislation this year and introduced, in which a public hearing will be on December 5th, which is integrating cottage communities into smaller pieces of property within residential units. But those are the key leaders in our county who are responsible for getting the policies and the implementation. But we can't go anywhere and get this accomplished if we don't get the permitting process addressed.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think that everything Linda said is a really good point. I think that it has to be stressed that, individual groups of organized NIMBYs, as they're called, the not in my backyard groups, these neighborhood organizations that can form around particularly affordable housing projects in opposition to them. We've seen that be very successful in other counties in terms of actually, defeating proposals that had state approval for low-income housing tax credits and for state subsidies to build affordable housing. The voice of a few powerful neighbors saying no can be very strong, especially if they're the folks who end up being able to come to council hearings and to be present and speak. That's obviously a real difficulty. And I think also it should be said that there is a lot of different things happening in terms of housing in the state and in Anne Arundel County. And you mentioned the affordability, and I had just seen an article recently in the Baltimore Banner that Anne Arundel County has the most expensive rents in the region at this point. And I think that one of the other factors here that has to be explored is kind of there's this issue of the housing stock, that we don't have enough housing in the state, we don't have enough affordable housing. And then we also aren't doing enough to protect the tenants and the renters who are in housing in the state right now, who are being pushed out by this housing shortage. And there's an unfortunate real tide in Annapolis, I want to say, in the State House in Annapolis, that wants to pit these two interests against each other, wants to pit rental protections, those who seek rental protections, against those who want to build more housing. And I think it's really important that we all call that out for the crap that it is. And so in terms of who's working against that, that's very easy to say. It's the landlord industry. It's the AOBA, the Maryland Multifamily Housing Association as well. Sorry, we get a little feedback. Oh, okay. they're the ones who are opposing the work that folks like Albert and I are working on in Annapolis. Yeah, so Albert?
Yeah, I mean, so I can speak to Baltimore City specifically. I think obviously kind of in the same framework that Linda said, prevalent. I also think that something that we see all the time is Annapolis, Baltimore City specifically, and I think other counties as well. They can't pass certain legislation without the approval of the state. And so something that Emily kind of mentioned was good cause eviction. Good cause eviction is this bill that's been brought forth, I think, for 8 years now in front of the General Assembly in Annapolis that would allow or will restrict a landlord from just telling a tenant that they have to move out without having to give a reason. And so how good cause works is that when when a landlord, generally speaking, so I live in a neighborhood on the east side of Baltimore, and there is changes happening. And so something that a couple of my neighbors have gotten is what's called a non-lease renewal. Landlord wants them to move out. They don't have to give a reason for it. They don't have to say anything, but they essentially are wanting to move them out in order to flip it, sell it to, gentrifiers, essentially. That's essentially what's happening in my neighborhood. Good cause eviction would limit the landlord from doing that. They have to have a good cause for wanting to terminate the lease. They can't just say, I want you out of the unit. There are a number of good cause provisions for that, right? They're not saying the landlord can never kick out the tenant. It's just saying that you can't just, retaliate against a tenant. So the tenant says, hey, I have mice or I don't have any heat. The landlord can't just say, okay, you got to get out, right? Because that's something that we see all the time. Extension, they can't just, move out people who have been in the city or in that neighborhood for so long. And so that's an issue that we see in Annapolis, kind of to Emily's point, which is this narrative that tenant protections limit development, and that's just not true. We've done research on this. We've talked to so many folk in the country, PhDs. We have so many research papers that say that good cause eviction, tenant protections do not limit construction, do not limit residential development. And I'll go as far as to say as well that even if development were to pick up in the state of Maryland, that's not a guarantee that prices will go down. In theory, yes, but has anyone ever heard of RealPage? RealPage is a price algorithm that landlords use to set the rental market. And it has created a type of collusion, in a sense, where landlords are putting a rent price at a certain point, and if all the landlords put it at that price, then it won't change, right? So there is particularly in Prince George's County, a number of bigger landlords who have been sued, and RealPage has also been sued by the Attorney General in Maryland to say that this is collusion. What essentially we're seeing is that, and DC as well, throughout the whole country, right, where we are seeing a number of landlords who are using this algorithm to set a price point, and if there aren't enough people to fit that price point, instead of lowering the price, they're just letting the unit sit vacant, right? And so that's a way for landlords to just keep prices at the way they are. So we want to make sure that while building is there, building is continuous, that, we're making sure that landlords can't just keep the rent at the price that they need by these algorithms through AI and the likes.
I appreciate it. So there was so many great answers. We heard, NIMBYs, we heard the landlord lobby, we heard, the bureaucracy that be. One of the things that, I would point out is, I think not just one point, but a big point is developers, right? And so a lot of developers I've talked to firsthand, as they've come before, the city council or the county council with proposals, and kind of the first thing I ask is like, well, how much is it gonna cost? Like, what's gonna be the price, right? And a lot of times they tell me, oh, we don't know the price yet. It's gonna depend on the market. It's gonna depend on the market, this, that, and the third. But a lot of them, have prices in mind that they're gonna charge for these units, right? And so, that's kind of the bare number I like to get down to. And so one of the questions I always ask is like, well, we're talking about affordability. What does affordability mean to you, right? And so most of them say 60 to 70% of the AMI. What that means is the area median income, right? And so, the problem for me in Prince George's, when we look at the AMI, they're including, this regional AMI, right? So not just, Anne Arundel, but most specifically for me, Northern Virginia. And Northern Virginia has two of the richest counties in America, right? I think they're usually either 1, 2, or 3, right? And so for Prince George's to be considered with Nova, that causes a lot of strain, it causes a lot of stress. And what we do see is we see people migrating to North Carolina, people migrating to Frederick, people migrating to Charles County, right? And so leaving for cheaper areas. I think there was 2 statistics I saw recently, and it was from the comptroller's office. It was that the median rent in the state is $1,721. And so that's just for, a 1-bedroom. And the other statistic was the average worker makes about $28 per hour, but they need to make about $38 per hour to afford a 2-bedroom, pretty much anywhere in the state. And so, of course, as a lot of you said, the income isn't keeping up with the pace of inflation and the cost of the goods. And I really like that you pointed out about the tiny home and the micro home. That's one of the things that the county is looking at, and I'm working on a proposal actually to propose like a mixed use development. In reference to the tiny home community. It definitely provides another pricing alternative, right? And what I have seen, and I visited one in Baltimore. It's called Hope Village. So it's a tiny home community. If anybody has an opportunity, definitely check it out. But I know you might have a point.
Can I interrupt a second on that?
You got it.
I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the AMI, and fortunately, Anne Arundel County is within the Baltimore district. So it does put us in a little bit different category as being compared to Northern Virginia.
Sure.
And Baltimore. And so I think we also have to look that it's not only the folks within the AMI, but we have people with special needs. We have an organization, nonprofit organization called the Fellow Organization that specializes in providing affordable housing for people with special needs in the category. They spent over a year trying to get through a public hearing process that was dictated by the county executive's office. So where the costs occur is in the delays. Every time there is a delay, the costs increase to the housing. We have a nonprofit developer up in Severn, Maryland, who is pursuing a workforce housing project, who is also being subjected to constant delays because there's no coordination within the Office of Planning and Permit Zoning to reviewing the permits. Every time a change is made, it goes back to their engineers who have to make that change, and then it gets resubmitted. That's an additional cost. And I'm going to bring it down to real life. A member of Broadneck Baptist Church here, Harris, I've been working with him for the past couple of years on his project. He has spent over $40,000 trying to get a permit approved in Anne Arundel County to build a home on his property. And he is nowhere near getting approval of that permit than he was 3 years ago. And I won't go into the excruciating delays, but that's part of our process that we're dealing with. And of course, when developers encounter those delays and they encounter those costs, they get passed on to the consumer or the buyer. If we are going to get affordable housing accomplished, not only in the state, in the Maryland, we have got to change our review and permitting process. We are not coordinating with the state policies that were enacted 2 years ago that would enable affordable housing to be occurred. We've got policies in place that would allow churches, congregations of faith to use their property for affordable housing. Getting through the approval process and just beginning is daunting. And we've held workshops with these groups to help them understand what this process is about. So we've got good mechanisms in place, but we are being hamstrung. And if we need to support some advocacy and some efforts, we've got to address where these barriers and these impediments are occurring.
That is awesome. I appreciate that input, and you're very right. You're very right. Thank you so much. And so I'll move on to the next question I have for the panel. Since affordability has become a major part of the governor's agenda, what actions can we take and implement, to implement an affordability agenda at the state level? And I'll.
I'm going to answer that for you. I think one of the important actions with respect to the governor's recent executive order about making available surplus property for use of affordable housing, the glitch is this property is going to be made available to market rate developers. And there is no guarantee that this property will be used, or this project will be used for affordable housing.
And so, I just wanted to put this in the ecosystem. Of course, both of you respond. So, I've also had the experience of, I wouldn't say negotiating with developers, right? But like having a conversation on what that looks like. And a lot of times what I see is the bare minimum, like 20-30% of affordable housing, right? And let's just say like it's a mixed use property. Like what I've seen a lot of times is their vision could be very simple. It's not very creative. They'll put a Starbucks at the bottom, and then the rest of the floors, would be basically like, market rate housing, outside of maybe like one floor. And so, how do we go further, than what we currently are requiring of jurisdictions? That I would also put that out there.
So I can only speak on Baltimore City, and Baltimore City is very sui generis in this kind of way because development is on the rise, but it is very in segregated neighborhoods. So Lawrence Brown's idea of the white L versus the black butterfly. Does anyone know about this? In Baltimore City, you have a block, you have the white L, which is essentially the corridor, and then the southeast portion of Baltimore. Then you have the east and west side, which is the black butterfly, which is kind of like just a demarcation of how racial segregation is in the city. And development is happening a lot in the white L. And the black butterfly, there is development here and there, but the issues that we are seeing isn't particularly where there isn't enough housing. Well, I should say there isn't enough housing that is habitable. The issue is vacant housing, particularly housing, blocks and blocks of housing in Baltimore City that are vacant and are eligible to be developed. And I think that there has been some back and forth, so trying to get developers to take on revitalizing these vacants, and that's been a struggle. There actually was a contract that was terminated this year, or it was late last year, over on the west side of Baltimore, with a developer out of New York City that had agreed to develop some vacants, and they just didn't do it within the time frame that was needed. And so, speaking of Baltimore City, as far as when we're talking about development, the vacancy issue, vacant homes in Baltimore City, is incredibly important to keep in mind because, one, I lived in a home that was vacant, that was refurbished, and that was something, the whole block was vacant. So that whole area is a part of the type of development that needs to happen in Baltimore City, because you can't just develop in these very already affluent pockets in Baltimore City and then just let the dilapidation and the vacant in the west side and what's called the Black Butterfly keep on. So we need to ensure that the development that happens includes the rehabilitation of the vacants.
Yeah, I don't have much to expand on except that I think that the point that was made that, yes, we do need to build more housing in the state, that's beyond apparent. But as that's happening, there should be these safeguards in place to ensure that there is affordable housing in that, and of course, there are a lot of different versions of the inclusionary housing laws, but strengthening those and creating more opportunities for people with lower AMIs as well to access those opportunities, I think is essential in any part of, I think a lot of the governor's plan that I've seen in terms of action is focused on revitalizing the housing stock. And I think just echoing and picking up on what others have said, that as that's happening, that's very important. Remembering to actually have dedicated affordable housing in that is a part of it.
I think there's another piece that we're not paying too much attention to right now, and that's the out-of-state investors that are coming in to purchase older homes that have been left go. We have a segment of our population of older residents, particularly even in the African American community, who are vulnerable to these investors of purchasing their homes, which then get turned around and sold at another higher level. And one in Arundel County is with the mobile home community down in South County, where they are all investor owned and constantly raising the rates of people who live there. And of course, this is a vulnerable population because it's an immigrant population, and the retaliatory actions against them are harsh and discriminatory. But I think we need to look at what is occurring with this investor-led movement within our communities that threaten our ability to gain access to some of the older homes to help support rehabilitation, to help support the rehabilitation of apartment units, and also even some of the shopping centers.
And to that point, I think I'm glad you brought up outside investors, because this is something that's happening in Baltimore a lot. And this isn't just about, this is about renters particularly, but the Baltimore Banner did a story about a month ago about these investors out in New York that bought up hundreds and hundreds of properties. Some of them were already owned by owners who had tenants in there, or they rented it out, and they all defaulted on those loans because they were getting loans through DSRC loans, which is a debt service ratio something. I'll get back to you on the exact term. But this is it's actually funded by the federal government. It's actually an incredible type of loan where a person can go get a loan and their income is not verified. All they just need to say is that I intend to rent this home out for for the purposes, of renting. I don't have a renter yet. I don't know where this renter is going to come from, but they get the loan. Obviously, they come with high interest rates and they fluctuate. There's not a lot of protection in them, but you can get these loans. And so what happened was a number of these New York investors from outside of Baltimore bought all these homes. There were tenants living inside of them. They all defaulted. And now there are hundreds and hundreds of tenants in Baltimore City who are looking at being evicted because the homes are being foreclosed on. And in that term, they're evicted because their lease is over, or the foreclosing party, which is usually a bank, doesn't want to be a landlord, right? And so they just send a notice of non-release after they foreclose, and the tenant has to move or they're evicted. And so that type of outside investor is a big issue in Baltimore City, particularly because of the low cost of buying a vacant or buying something that is low cost. So you get investors from Turkey, you get investors from Argentina, you get investors from all over the place. People who have never stepped foot in Baltimore City, who couldn't point to Baltimore City on a map, who own property, have people living in them. The places aren't licensed, the places have mold, they have rats, they have all these other things because they are not, a part of the community. They're not a part of making sure that folk are being protected and the likes, and they're at arm's length. You can't get a hold of them.
So many, great responses. One of the things I wanted to point out was that you mentioned, of course, the outside investors. We saw a lot of, that happen in Prince George's County, particularly one company, I remember BlackRock, very, very big name. And my biggest issue with outside investors was kind of the anonymity, right? And so it's a bunch of shell companies. Right, and so you're trying to hold someone accountable for a dilapidated property, and then you find out oh, it's another company. You got to go through another company, and they have a property manager, and so it's just a web of trying to find out who to hold accountable sometimes. So that's one of the things that I stress at the state and the local level is, hey, we need to pass some bills to disallow these shell companies to invest in our local community, because it's very difficult to hold them accountable. I will point out that I think that illegal renting is a big problem. There's many times, I could say in my own municipality, I pointed out to code enforcement about illegal renting, hey, they don't have a license, are we gonna come down on them? And it gets very quiet. The response, the response that I expect it never comes. As far as them holding them accountable, you see at these illegal places where they're renting, you see illegal evictions happen too, right? And so that's how, I as a housing advocate became aware of this issue, because, I then had to say approach the landlord hey, if you go through with this, I'm gonna definitely put you on blast, And so I think that illegal renting is an issue. And one of the things I've seen in Montgomery County that they did to improve a lot of their rental properties and still continue doing is they have a troubled properties list. And so now, since they passed the rent stabilization bill, one of the things that they've seen is hey, the property cannot increase, rent through the housing authority unless they get off the troubled properties list. And so what you saw is a lot of those landlords invest in those properties, to get them off that list. And the crazy thing is when we continue to talk about rent stabilization and affordability, they'll say, oh, if you do this, we can't invest. These properties are gonna become so it's crazy that, they're able to invest. They're able to invest if they need to invest in their properties to, charge more in rent, right? What happens? And so, just pointing that out. But one of the things that I wanted to go to was, we are in the DMV area. And so how is the federal government and the mass layoffs of African-American women affecting the housing market in the DC metro and Baltimore metro region?
I mean, I can go first, even though I'm not sure that I really have the best answer for this. And I'll just, I'll give a little context too in terms of our organization. So the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, we are a nonprofit organization that administers the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program, which helps people with low incomes move from areas of concentrated poverty to areas with economic resources in Baltimore City and the 5 surrounding counties, including Anne Arundel County. We serve approximately like 98% of the 98% of the people we serve identify as Black or African American, and 96% are female-headed households. Of those folks, we do see, so our folks are generally like renters, so it's a somewhat different population, I think, in terms of the overall housing market. But what we see, we do have families, of course, who work for the federal government. We saw an impact from the furloughs. We did an analysis of, the largest employers of all of our participants to see, how many were impacted by the furloughs just recently. And there were certainly some, but we found that a lot of the folks, I think I'm moving this. Thank you. Sorry about that. A lot of the folks that we work with work for in the hospital industry. They work for the healthcare industry, right? They're our essential workers. They provide services. They're CNAs. They're nurses, and they do that important work for private institutions. But what we see is that their wages are just not keeping pace with what is required for renting in this area. So I think the bigger issue really that we see, understanding that we are in this space of having many people who work for the federal government is just wages, period. Wages, the depression of wages in this area and what people are able to make for the services that they provide. Again, saving lives, and these folks are individuals who receive a housing choice voucher, which means that they make most of them less than 50% of the area median income. And they're essential workers. So to me, I think that's the larger issue, is just wages, period.
I'll just speak to the stat that I said earlier. 1 in 5 Black renters, if you're a child, face eviction. And we know that that's tied to Black motherhood. And it's just, you lose your job. It's hard to get that unemployment check as soon as you need it. Rent's every month. And the landlord can file and get an eviction within 4 days, right? In Anne Arundel County, it's 4 days, more than other jurisdictions. But landlord files for not paying your rent, and within 4 days you're in front of a judge if you actually know that you have that court case. And so that's a big issue that you see, and evictions happen real fast, and evictions are on your record for at least 7 years. And so when you're dealing with that, that's something that causes a steep decline into homelessness, because obviously you get an eviction on your record, landlords don't want to rent to you because of that eviction record, and all of a sudden you and your children find yourselves in shelters and extreme homeless. And then we get into the whole Grant Pass decision from the Supreme Court that came down last year, which criminalizes homelessness and sleeping in public. And so that's a big issue that we see. But one thing I do want to stress is that when we talk about federal workers who were furloughed, federal workers who lost their job, a large number of those are renters. I think that we've couched that a little bit in homeownership, which is obviously a big issue. Foreclosures are going to be on the rise in Maryland. It's happening in Baltimore. It's going to happen throughout the state very, very, very soon. And so that's going to be a big issue. But evictions happen much faster than foreclosures. And we don't have the infrastructure for rental assistance. We don't have the infrastructure to delay these type of evictions for people to get the employment that they need to pay off the back rent. So this is something that we're going to see a big issue with, and it's going to fall largely on Black women and their families.
In Anne Arundel County, the food bank and the benevolent network report a significant, close to 40% increase in demand for support for rental housing, having lost their job, and support for financial assistance, both for food and for shelter. And I think where we had a cushion during COVID that we could provide support for people, we don't have that as much as we did. So it is affecting African American people at a greater extent.
So, I completely agree. Some very great responses, and I'll go to my last question. But I wanted to share one story, right? And so we talk about evictions and evictions happening. I can say personally, I helped someone. She was a long time friend, and lived in the community next to me. I would say a lower income community. But she called me in tears. She had gotten evicted, I guess, a couple hours prior, right? And so right then I went into like crisis mode, because this day I feel like it was like 40 degrees outside. So it was cold. She was out there with her kids. She had two like teenage kids, and she has an elderly mother she was taking care of. And so went into crisis mode, like, one, where are you right now? She, had went to the library, was staying warm at the public library. But then, of course, then I looked up what time does the library close, like what are the library hours today? And so it wasn't a late day, so I knew, hey, I got to figure out something within a few hours. I remember I called the delegates. I called the senator of that area. I called the county council person. I called the county executive chief of staff. Like, I just went down the list. I called the congressman's constituent service person. Just went down the list trying to make sure that, somebody can help in this immediate crisis. One of the things that I also found out was that, there's so many loopholes to a lot of the different services, right? We went to the multi-service center that exists right there in Laurel, and, it now has, I think, like 24 beds. And so it's supposed to be like short-term transitional housing, but you can't stay there unless you are currently employed, full time. And so, the reason that she, ended up in the situation is because she had lost her job or two jobs, and then, fell on financial hard times. And she was the only one working in the house. And so I was like, dang, that's a caveat, They have available beds. It's a brand new place that, we paid millions and millions of dollars for, but you can't stay here unless you're working full time. Well, that seems like a challenge. And then I connected her with another person, and then to find out, like, oh, you couldn't receive, cash assistance or this type of assistance unless you had a job. I was like, well, that is a challenge. That's a challenge. And so just trying to figure out other, resources that exist. But like, what I do see is like there are a lot of loopholes. And then also it's just I also feel that it can be disheartening for some people to actually go through the process, because there's so much paperwork, and so like the amount of paperwork that she has to fill out, and to be honest with you, like sometimes she's overwhelmed, so like I might have to help her fill out the paperwork, right, and or things like that. So it's just, do they have the resources, right? And if they have the resources, is that resource actually being helpful to them? And so that's something that I always consider. But just brought it front of mind that like it can happen to anybody. It can happen to somebody but of course when it happens to you or somebody it hits home, right? When it affects you personally. And so that's something that I keep in mind. But the last question I wanted to pivot to was, what is the home ownership gap in Baltimore? What is the home ownership gap in the Baltimore metro region, and why does it continue to happen? And what does the racial wealth gap, or does the racial wealth gap play a role in the unaffordability of housing in the DC, Baltimore region?
Yes. To that last question, obviously, the history of racial segregation has created this wealth gap in Baltimore City specifically, in homeownership specifically. And I think, and maybe Emily could give a better history of this, but as you know, the turn of the 1900s, we see a large investment in homeownership with white neighbors at the exclusion of black folk. And that creates the present that we have today, right? Where we have this large racial wealth gap, large racial homeownership gap. We know that wealth is accumulated in this country through your home. And that was not created through the free market. That was a government structured entity. That was a government funded way to allow for white people to have wealth in their home. And what we're seeing now is, particularly since the turn of Nixon and Reagan, that the free market is essentially it's up for the free market to create that wealth. And that is not how wealth was created prior, right? And so this idea that if we allow for investors to come in, we allow for landlords to be free of all these tenant protections, that's going to create a lower rent cost, allow for folk to be able to save and be homeowners. That's not a guarantee. And that's not how wealth was created to begin with. That was not how it was done. It was a government instructed, funded entity. And so that is something that we are seriously missing in Baltimore City, particularly because we have invested and given so many tax cuts to so many corporations in Baltimore City to do what we want them to do, build, and they are not holding up their end of the bargain, right? So we think about just Target or Walmart, right? We gave Target all this money to open up a Target in Mondawmin Mall on the west side. And as soon as that money dried up, they closed up shop, right? That was not the intent of the contract that was there. The intent was for Target to always be there, to allow for the west side to have a place to find groceries, to not have to go elsewhere to get their needs. However, when you're talking about corporate, they're always talking about the bottom line. And once those tax cuts went away, once that dried up, they were out of there. And so when we're talking about black ownership, black wealth gap, we need to understand that it can't just be relegated to the free market, because that's not how wealth was created to begin with. It was a government backed entity.
Yeah, and I think building on that a little bit, it's important, I think, to remember that the financial institutions and mechanisms that we use now, like, for example, credit scores, bake in discrimination. There's a lot of research out there that even with perfect repayment history, Black and brown borrowers tend to receive lower credit scores than white people. So there's something going on here, right? It's baking in the discrimination, and obviously we know that credit score is an important part of homeownership. It's also become an important part of renting, which is really backwards, because credit scores were never meant to evaluate your likelihood of paying your rent. Your on-time rental payments don't generally go into your credit score, but this is another way that that has become a popular mechanism that is baking in an ability to discriminate against certain people from having housing. So I think it's everything that Albert said, and then also remembering that these things that we use, like credit scores, a magical math number that means something about your credit worthiness. They were intended for a specific purpose, and they're not fair.
I think where some of the issues are occurring are really at the federal government, and that's where we need to start leveraging our power that the not only the current administration, but with respect to the Wall Street that is managing the finances that are investing in real estate, and the loan opportunities that are being made available primarily to the free market instead of the affordable home owners. I think that's where we have to begin to leverage some advocacy with our federal representatives, because it all trickles down, and it trickles down to organizations like ACDS and being able to get the funding to support the affordable housing projects.
Agreed. And so I wanted to close making sure we talk about briefly what the legislative priorities are. You know, we have a legislative session coming up in Annapolis, you know, that 90-day session. And so what are your legislative focuses, especially in terms of housing affordability?
Sure. So obviously with housing affordability comes housing consistency, being able to stay in your home for a long, consistent amount of time, being able to create that community. And so Renters United Maryland, we have a number of priorities, but I'll just hit on two. Good cause eviction. This is what I mentioned before, this idea that, and it's local enabling, which means that the state law would just allow for local jurisdictions to opt in to a good cause provision, which would allow for landlords to, which require landlords to give the reason for why they're non-renewing a lease. I know Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, they've all talked about how they intend to adopt that if they were allowed to do so, because it restricts gentrification. It allows for a person to be able to protect themselves from retaliation from a slumlord who wants to kick them out because they complain about something. And so we want to make sure that that is something that's comes to fruition. It passed the House 2 years ago, and it's been on the Senate side to try to pass something through the JPR and through the Senate President. So that's something that we're going to focus on. Another priority that we're hitting on is the fair chance in housing. Martin's been in on this. Linda, through Senator Hinton, has really been great in pushing that narrative forward. So the fair chance in housing bill is a bill that would limit a person who is applying for rental housing from having to disclose their criminal record before they're approved for everything else. And so we kind of view this as kind of a ban the box, ban the box for employment. When you're applying to see if you want to get a job, the employer can't take a look at your criminal history until they look at your other qualifications. And so this works in the same way in housing, mainly because the biggest indicator of recidivism is homelessness, right? And so for people who are returning home, if they don't have stable housing, the likelihood of them recidivizing it shoots through the roof. And particularly when we are dealing with a post-grant pass opinion, the grant pass opinion was a Supreme Court opinion that came down last year that says that counties can find essentially you to be convicted of a crime if you are homeless, if you are sleeping in public property, right? This is something that a number of jurisdictions throughout the country are trying to pass. There's a couple of counties on the west side of Maryland that have already passed this. And so what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that people who are returning home, people who have done their bids, who have been found to be released, that they are given the fair chance of being allowed to say, hey, this is my employment, this is my credit score, these are all the things that show that I am a good tenant. And once they're approved, that's when they're able to say, okay, also I was convicted of this. And the landlord is able to take in evidence, mitigating evidence, saying I was convicted, 20 years for this, or I was convicted 10 years for this, I did this amount of time, this is how I rehabilitated. And what that does is it allows for the person who has been convicted, essentially a more well-rounded way of showing that they are a quality applicant for the housing, because in so many ways a person will see a criminal record and they'll just outrightly deny them for that, even if it's a criminal record that has nothing to do with whether or not they're a good tenant. right? And so that's a big bill that we intend to see as a priority going forward through the House and through the Senate as well. And I'll let some other priorities.
Yes, so our biggest initiative this coming session that we're working with Albert and the Renters United Maryland Coalition on is another tenant screening issue specifically for individuals who have an income-based housing subsidy, like a housing choice voucher, to prevent housing providers from using exclusionary tenant screening practices like credit score or credit history for those individuals to evaluate their rental applications. So obviously I teed myself up a little bit with discussing the issues with credit scores overall, but it's fair enough that landlords want to evaluate the likelihood of a tenant's ability to pay rent, but the problem is that the credit score really doesn't tell them that. And especially when it's an individual with a housing subsidy where the majority of their rent, or in some cases all of their rent, is being covered by another organization or the federal government, wherever their voucher comes from, it makes it even less valuable to know what their credit score is, because you know they have that backing. You know that if their income changes, the subsidy changes to reflect that, and ultimately the landlord is going to be made whole. So this really builds on the HOME Act that Albert mentioned earlier, the source of income protections that we have in the state to fulfill the promise of the housing choice voucher. It's supposed to be about choice. It's supposed to be about enabling families who have low incomes to have the same opportunities to live in the neighborhoods that they want to, that everyone desires. And these barriers are increasingly being used to limit that, to prevent that. So that's going to be the bill that we're working on the strongest. There's also, I think, somewhat of a companion bill to that around tenant screening, which would be a Tenant Screening Transparency Act. And this is legislation that would require housing providers to give you the report and the reason that they denied your rental application, because right now in Maryland, they don't have to do that, right? You can just say no, just say no, like we don't want you. And it's helpful because then you can contest the issues that what they provide in the screening report. Most landlords use a third-party screening provider. They're not like individually calling and checking your rental history. And these things, again, the data out there shows they're full of errors. They're rife with errors. So giving people the opportunity to contest this is a powerful way to increase housing access as well.
So the Department of Housing and Community Development has 4 bills that it's in the process of working on. They're still in concept, so nothing has been really sent to drafting yet. And they will focus around providing support both with the pilot program, which is the funding of the for low-income housing, and as well as the use of state-owned lands. One of the things that we're waiting for is the list of identified state-owned properties that may be available for the use of affordable housing. DHCD has not compiled that list as yet. The other bill that I'm aware of that is in the process of being drafted is being sponsored by the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition, which would use funding to rehab existing affordable multi-purpose family housing units. Many of these units received funding to get started, but over the years, the cost of maintenance has not kept up. So rather than having them to be sold off to market rate investors, the thought behind this is that we create some funding to support the maintenance and get these improvements made to help keep the affordable housing stock in place.
Sorry, I'm going to take a second bite of the apple because I think these 2 bills are really important, particularly now, and particularly considering who I'm speaking with. So obviously, the federal government And the second Trump administration has absolutely gutted fair housing, absolutely gutted racial discrimination in housing, essentially where at this point, based on HUD guidelines and some of the rules that are coming down, that essentially legalizes discriminating against someone because of their race, their creed, and the likes. Essentially, the only thing that it looks like the federal government is interested in enforcing is if someone's being denied because they are specifically white and Christian. That's kind of it. And so there are two bills that are coming in that we are looking to prioritize is a state fair housing bill, which is essentially like taking the federal fair housing laws, which require that a landlord can't deny someone because of their race, because of their gender, because of their orientation, their marriage status, disability, source of income, and just make that a state law so that state actors such as the Attorney General, such as, Public Justice Center, can use that to enforce against landlords to not discriminate against someone because they're Black. And so that's something that we're looking to reinstall that as well. In addition to that, also goes into the Fair Housing or the Fair Chance on Housing Act, which is there are no guidelines. There used to be guidelines for federal government laws that would allow for a person who's convicted of a crime to be able to protect themselves and be able to show that they've been rehabilitated. That has also gone to the federal level. And so it's really up to the state to fill in the gaps where the federal government has decided not to intercede, because essentially it's the Wild Wild West out there. There is no enforcement of the Fair Housing Code at all from HUD's perspective. And it's probably not going to be, even if there is a change in the administration in 2028, it's going to take another 4 years to actually put that back into place. So we're looking at something where the state really, really needs to step in and fix this issue because the federal government's not.
So I will close out 3 thoughts. The rent is too damn high. Stable housing creates stable communities. And for all of these policies and innovation that we want to see, we have to fight like hell. And this is an election year, so we can of course remind the people who are running, the people who are there, that this needs to be a priority on the top of their mind: housing affordability, and making sure that we protect the residents here in this county and throughout the state. And so, with that being said, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We have gifts for everybody as well. We ran over into our breakout session time, but I wanted to give everyone from Linda to Martin and Albert and Emily a gift for coming out this evening on behalf of the NAACP. You can ask questions, definitely. I mean, I would love for you to ask questions to them. Go ahead. How many rentals are available in the county?
I apologize that I don't have that statistic. I would say to go to the website for the Anne Arundel Community Development Services. There's a report called the CAPER report, C-A-P-E-R, that is required to be produced annually by ACDS that gives a detailed explanation of what we have here in the county with respect to available units, what has been accomplished. This report's over the past, each year a report is done, as well as where the funding is coming from and plans for the future.
There's another question behind you.
Thank you, Brad. Peter, this morning. Always good to be in church. My name is Willis Fields, and I'm on the Economic Development. I chair the Economic Development Committee for the Baltimore branch of NAACP. On Monday, we went to a hearing at City Hall about City Council Bill 25-006. We were shocked. This bill would give land owners, landlords, developers the right go into any neighborhood and take a single-family building and make it a multiple-dwelling building. So we were there, some 5 of us, with the branch, and we were like, where did this bill come from? Why are you asking for us to give landlords by right the ability for developers, as you mentioned, out of state, just come in any block, anywhere in the city, and take a single-family home and put 1, 2, 3, 4 apartments. So I did some research, and I found that this bill was passed at state level first. It was Senate Bill 891 and House Bill 1466. And since it passed during this session, it had a local mandate, which meant the state law requires every county to have this kind of permission. And so I thought it would be great for all of us in the room to read about Senate Bill 891. It is a state law, and House Bill 1466, because it's really giving carte blanche to landlords and developers that could come into my block, which is 90% homeowners. They could find a couple of vacant houses and turn it into rental properties. And we're trying to increase home ownership in Baltimore, not knocking renters, but in a homeowner situation, we don't necessarily want that kind of bill to be in our city. So my point is, when the state legislatures, in this case, Senator Murray Washington, Delegate Marvin Holmes from Prince George's County, I believe, Delegate Regina Boyce from Baltimore City, Delegate Robin Lewis from Baltimore City, they all passed this bill and didn't send any notification to anyone that this bill was even being talked about. So we were blindsided last Monday. And you can see the land use hearing on Charm City TV, and it was 98% of citizens against the bill, but it was 98% of landlords and developers for the bill. So I just want to mention again, Senate Bill 891 and House Bill 1466. I just wanted to ask if you guys were aware of that.
Briefly, yes. I practice in Baltimore City. Yes, we're aware. We didn't take a position on the bill. There's a lot of issues and concerns we have with the bill as far as how it would affect renters. We do acknowledge that we do need to be developing in Baltimore, but as I said, vacants are a big issue, and vacants are there to already be developed. Transitioning already one unit to multi-unit, that's not the biggest obstacle in Baltimore City specifically. I think statewide, that's a different issue, but in Baltimore City, because of the housing and the amount of population that's there, it's there.
You mentioned the Black Butterfly, and what he's saying is that they're going to be building more, putting more of these rentals in the Black Butterfly, and that it's going to be, that they already overwhelmed with a lot of dilapidated housing, poorly managed small rentals in the Black Butterfly. And so whereas you're seeing a bunch of gentrification of upper market rate income, market rate housing in the White L in the city. And so that's generally where a lot of this, dissension comes from. Black homeowners not wanting to see their neighborhood have these different types of housing stock because they feel like it's already been overwhelmed, and you already see a depletion of services in the Black L for these types of issues. So, and a lot of the property managers could care less about how their tenants are acting when you get into these neighborhoods. As a former property manager myself in the city, it just becomes a big issue that a lot of the homeowners will deal with, but the city won't necessarily deal with in the same way as they would in the White L. And so I totally understand it, especially from a Baltimore City perspective. We do have to wrap up in order to respect our facilitators of the workshop's time. We have General Assembly 101. Thank you guys. Please clap it up for our panel. Thank you all. So we have General Assembly 101, How to Testify, facilitated by Josh Malarkey and Linda Davis. Please stand and raise your hand. They will be in I have you guys in. Y'all in here in the sanctuary? Okay. And Building Grassroots Power is in the Sunday school room that is with Fred Curtis. I can take you guys there. And then we have Turning an Issue into a Campaign. Jen, please raise your hand. and Jen is going to be in the vestibule here. So let's split up, and if you're going to be going with Jen, please follow her now. She is going to be going into the vestibule where we're talking about turning an issue into a campaign. And if you all stay here, you're going to be talking about General Assembly 101 and discussing how to testify with Linda Davis and Josh Malarkey of Showing Up for Racial Justice. And then we have Building Grassroots Power, facilitated by Fred Curtis. So we're going to move all of our collective bodies into where we need to be. And Fred, raise your hand. This is Fred right here. Okay, so Fred will also be able to